All right. So, who are you?
I'm Eric Doohen, owner of Java Bistro in Simpsonville.
Very cool. And tell me a little bit about who you are. I mean, what drives you? What motivates you?
Well, I try real hard to glorify God through my life. Of course, I don't always accomplish that every day or every moment, for that matter. But overall, I've tried to live a purposeful life thus far since getting to know Christ, and trying to always learn more about Christ and about the Bible and our Creator.
Were you born into a Christian family? Did you come from a Christian background?
That's a little complicated. I was brought up Catholic, but we didn't really talk about it in the home. It was kind of, in my opinion, a hypocritical faith in our household. It just didn't resonate with me. I knew that there was something not right with it. There was no passion in our family. A lot of mediocrity, a lot of passiveness. And it pushed me away, and I did have a time, of course, after, I guess, getting out of college, or not, I shouldn't say after college, before college, getting into college, and those times I was just further and further away from God at the time, thinking I would make my way, I guess. But it was all a path to finding Him, and He made my path, so I guess it was the plan. I'm not happy with that, but it is what it is.
Very cool. Very cool. I was saved actually right after college, also too. So later in faith, or later believer as well. What? When did that? When was that for you? What events led up to that? I know that can be a very long.
It can be
in terms of all events, but I mean, what's
the skinny of it is, I tried to be a rock star basically from about age 16 on. I decided that in order to be said rock star, you must drink lots of alcohol, smoke pot, try and get all the girls, all that stuff that you saw on MTV.
Sure.
So I was going after that, thinking that was what happiness was, and I might as well be as happy as possible, and that looked like a pretty good route to me at the time. But during that time, I found a lot of emptiness in my soul, had a lot of anxiety and panic attacks when left alone to my own devices. I was scared to death of death. That was one of the things, the emptiness that occurred during those panic attacks, thinking you're going to die and not really being able to see eternity, but somehow you just know in your heart that maybe this eternity is real and you're making a really big mistake and you don't have a relationship with this Creator, but you don't know how to get in touch with the Creator because no one's really talked to you about that. So that was kind of where I was at. So I started that path and trying to get to find God. I remembered I had my first child out of wedlock. I was living with a lady, and I was about 21, 22 in that range. Mm-hmm. And we did end up going to church. Her mother had invited us. It was on White Horse Road is all I can remember. Really, really charismatic church. I'd never been to one of those. It was quite a different approach to church, and it did catch my interest. A little different from the Catholic, right? It absolutely was, but I mean, you're seeing these people, and they were expressing themselves, and, some of them I wasn't so sure that they were being real with it. Some of them I thought were acting. That's up to God to know, and to judge on that. I could see that some seemed really authentic with it and genuine. So while I was there, the pastor's wife came over and asked me, did I know Jesus? And I gave her the honest answer. I don't know Jesus. I'm interested in it. I'm not saying there isn't. I don't know if there's a God, but I want there to be a God because I don't want to lay in a box when I'm dead and never see anything again, or never speak again, never think again. Those fearful thoughts.
Yeah.
And so the the lady just invited me to sit down and pray with her. And it was my girlfriend's mother, my girlfriend at the time, me, and that lady. And she asked me a couple questions, and then we prayed. And she basically asked Jesus to reveal himself to me. And as we were sitting there, I was like, this is a good prayer, you know. Well, as soon as she finished the prayer, she looked at me and said, "How do you feel?" And it's like something hit me at that moment, and it was, I couldn't really explain it at the time. The best explanation I had was, I kind of feel like I'm high right now, which I wasn't, just for the record. And she didn't really explain much more after that. She just kind of looked at me thoughtfully, and the day kind of went on. Well, it wasn't till, I don't know, 5-10 years later, I was sitting at a table talking about getting baptized, and there was more than one person in the group that had had a similar experience when introduced to the Holy Spirit or introduced to Jesus, that they had an experience kind of similar to this. And it was like that aha moment that God was there even then in some of my worst times, and he was trying to reach me, and he did. And so that was just the experience, that Holy Spirit and Jesus, I don't know, giving me that experience right there. Just, I don't know, it secured that for me, that I wasn't just having a feeling that time. It was something real and solid. And when you call on him, that he will answer.
So was there a period of time? So there's a good 10 years there between those two events.
Pretty close to, yeah, probably more like maybe 7 or 8, I think.
Was there an almost immediate change, or was it very gradual, or was it after that 7-year mark? Was it just from then, that point on, when you realized, okay, this is something that's real? Was there a point of change, or when did that occur?
It was very gradual. It's kind of embarrassing. You would think after a prayer and an answer that maybe the mind could be changed immediately and your behaviors might even follow. The real blessing was, at the time, my oldest daughter was my only daughter. She really was what began to change me. It was another gift from God. I've told her on many occasions that I feel like she's one of the reasons I'm still alive. If I had gone down the road without her there and for me to care for her and to love someone more than myself, I'm pretty sure that I would have just gone after those more parties and things like that, the reckless lifestyle that I was in. She made me really think about my thoughts and my actions, and that she could be without her dad for one night because he was in jail, or eternity because he did something stupid and had a car wreck or whatever.
Right.
So that blessing, I count as a big one there. That was definitely in the plan, and that was changing my thoughts a lot. So that sculpted my behavior a lot more, I call it frontal lobe development, where you start to see consequences, and you also have someone there that you care about so much that you don't want to hurt. So those things started coming together, getting better jobs, better work record, not doing things in front of your daughter that would hurt them.
Sure.
So those things helped. And then I did get away from my daughter's mother, and that was a good thing. That was a toxic relationship. I gained custody of my daughter during that time, which also gave me more responsibility. There was no one to put the blame on at that point for my daughter's care but myself.
Sure.
So that was a good thing. Adding responsibility onto myself was a good thing. During that time, of course, now I'm single, and I want to find a mate that is good for my daughter. So where do you find that said date? Well, maybe a church. So I found out there was some nice ladies at one of the local churches. Went to that church. I did not find said young lady. But the sermon was basically, have you read the Bible? And if you think there is even an inkling that God exists or that you need a relationship with him, that maybe you should read said Bible. And they gave out bookmarks that had how to read the Bible, not straight through. You would read a little bit of New Testament, a little bit of Psalms, and a little bit of Old Testament each day. It was supposed to be in a year. It took me about 3, but I did complete that journey. And during that journey, I also did find a wife, and I did technically get saved. It was kind of a couple tries. And by that, I don't mean that my behavior was terrible. I, went reckless and started going out partying, but I didn't feel that heart change. It was a very gradual thing for me. I know everyone's kind of different in that, but for me, it was my behavior was changing, but my heart, I guess I was still learning, how do I love God? What really is love? I realized that love is not an emotion. It's not that fuzzy-wuzzy feeling you have for somebody. This is a purpose. And so like with your wife, whom you cannot get along with at all times, that's impossible, that even when you're upset with her, you still do actions that are loving towards her and your family. The same thing goes with God. If you're not getting your way and you're kind of shaking your fist at God, does that mean you break off the relationship? And the other part about it that I've learned over time since being saved is, well, I kind of do the analogy of marriage a lot because that's in the Bible too. Mm-hmm. If I don't actively talk to my wife, what kind of relationship is that? If I don't actively kind of do dates with my wife, what am I doing for the relationship? And I feel like I need to spend time with God, like really get a relationship, like kind of a conversation back and forth, kind of feel things out. When I do this, do you like this? And when I do this, do you like this? And the relationship is very much of marriage. And so that's just kind of where I'm at with those things. Getting saved is kind of the same time when Java Bistro actually came to existence. I would call it one of those final times that I was making it solid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was invited by my pastor to Promise Keepers in Atlanta, 2006, I believe it was. Might have been around August, I think. And they had great speakers, but also getting to room with my pastor was really cool. It was quite a large church, so to be invited to stay with him, it was kind of an honor.
Yeah.
We had some discussions previously, and I don't know. I guess he felt led that he should contact me and see if I wanted to go. Luckily, I actually was in a factory job. And I had 4 days on, 4 days off, and it just so happened that I was able to go on my 4 days off, so I had no excuses really.
Right.
And really, honestly, I wanted to go, and I was kind of wondering who would I room with. I was kind of like awkward. I really don't know anybody.
Sure.
And for him to call me was just like, I really relate to this guy. Mm-hmm. When he speaks at church, I mean, I can listen, and it reaches me, so it wasn't weird. So.
Right.
I don't know. It was just one of those blessings. I feel like it was definitely in the plan. So we get there the first day. It was kind of like, I think, a Friday night, a Saturday night, and a Sunday morning kind of thing, and then you left. Friday night, it was kind of like a pep rally. We're all cheering on God and all that. Had a couple speakers. The second day, there was a lot of invitations to meet God, meet Christ, to give your life to Christ. And it was kind of I was just trying to solid it up. Like, I had decided that I wanted to follow Christ. I had decided that I wanted him in my heart. And, the Holy Spirit, I had figured out that, that had happened. And And so I was just trying to make sure, like, did we tie every necessary bow on that package that I wasn't going to miss out on this awesome heavenly party we were going to have for eternity. So I was trying to just get that right. So Saturday was that day. I listened, and then we went back to the hotel room. Another guy that I knew from high school happened to be there. He came to the hotel room. We're all just hanging out and talking about our experiences, having fellowship. And it was just that moment of getting that right and making sure everything was according to the Bible, that my heart was there, and I had done everything necessary to kind of be in that club,
Sure.
So that had happened. So going on to how did Java Bistro come to fruition, and why, and those kind of things. The next day, that was Sunday morning before we left, there was a great speaker, and I wish I could remember his name. But at the very end of what he said, which was so powerful, and he just talked about things that had happened in his life, he asked, would anyone like to come down to the stage, kneel down, and be led by God? Like, I guess you're asking God what he wants, and if he says, you're going to do it. And so I was like, I mean, if I am who I say I am, and Jesus who he says he is, and I said I was going to follow him, I mean, this just seems like the necessary step. And I'm thinking maybe, I mean, this should be everyone, should want to, but not everyone kneeled. So, I was just like, all right, well, I'm going to go kneel. And luckily there was a lot of people kneeling, and I couldn't even get down to the stage. I was kneeling in a stair, down the stairs, basically. So It was a lot of participation. The prayer was said. It was a very powerful prayer. Had men putting their hands on me and praying over me. And, I can say that during that prayer, I felt like something was going to happen. I did not know it was going to be on the bus ride home. The bus ride home. So I remember getting on the bus, and I think it might have been our pastor or just another guy said, hey, why don't you guys put away your cell phones? Let's turn them off for the ride home. Let's all just talk and get to know each other and see what God's done in our lives. So I was like, okay, cool. Well, I had the seat next to me that was empty. So I'm like kind of looking for that conversation. Everyone else is talking, and I'm like, okay. Well, this isn't working out so good for me, but I'm just going to sit here. And I was kind of 3/4 back on the bus, and this guy, Frank, comes walking by, who we have a breakfast named after. And he's standing there. He can't get in the bathroom. And he was actually the guy that created a men's group at our church, quite a large men's group at our church. And he was a speaker sometimes for that, and I had been attending that a little bit. So he's just standing there, and I looked at him, and I'm like, hey, I know you from that men's group. You want to sit down and talk? And he's later on told me that he had to sit down. There was no stopping it. He said he was about to fall over. He was actually sick. So I feel like maybe that was God, too, because he said he wasn't so sure he would have sat down.
Yeah, sure, if he wasn't about to toss his cookies there.
Yeah, but he just said, I needed to sit down, so he did. Well, I told him about the conversation I had, and it was with the guys behind me. One of the guys was an operator for Chick-fil-A, and he basically, well, actually, the question was, to him, from me, was, so, Chuck, what makes serving chicken what God told you to do? Because he had mentioned maybe the previous day that God had told him to be this said Chick-fil-A operator.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so I was kind of skeptical, honestly. Like, okay, so yeah, you're going to go serve chicken for God. I gotcha, yeah.
Right.
So he basically said, well, it's not so much the serving chicken as it is that they get to share the good news into the community. They get to give back to the community. It was more what they do in the community around this chicken,
Sure.
So, it took me a second, but I was like, okay, well, that's cool. And honestly, I didn't know that much about Chick-fil-A. I had probably stepped foot in there maybe once or twice, knew that they closed on Sundays.
Sure.
That was about it. So, at that point, this is when Frank had sat down, and I told him that story. And I said, my wife and I at times have talked about me getting out of the factory, working third shift a lot, and being able to attend like men's group regularly because the 4 days on, 4 days off thing wasn't really good for that. And going to church wasn't good for that really either. It was hard to get on any type of schedule because 4 Wednesdays out of 8, you were at work.
Sure.
So it just wasn't working out. So I said, my wife and I have kind of talked, like I had some restaurant experiences growing up a lot, actually. And we could, maybe open up a breakfast and lunch place, and, that would be kind of interesting. And I'd be able to get my nights off, have dinner with the families, attend a Bible study, go to church regularly because we would close on Sundays. I think that would be really cool. Well, Frank says, I've actually been going to this coffee shop in the area, and the owners, they've only had it for like 6 months, but they're already ready to sell. It just wasn't for them. They didn't realize really how hard it is. They really didn't have restaurant experience, so it was just not. It's not their bag. I think they'd be willing to sell to you, and I bet you could make it more of a restaurant rather than just a coffee shop. For some reason, I bit. I was like, well, all right, sure. I did just kind of talk about it. We did just kind of had this conversation. Okay, I'll bite on that. So I'm sure there was more to the conversation, but that's the gist of it. But something tugged at my heart. Well, here's the cool part. This is the clincher. So I get off the bus. We had switched numbers and all that. I get off the bus and turned on my cell phone, called my wife. Told her I was on my way home, that I'd missed her, all that good stuff. And I told her everything basically I'd told you. Well, I was like, what do you think? She's like, we have to. I said, this isn't the normal response, by the way.
Right.
So...
Is she normally a risk taker?
No. It'd be a lot more questioning. So she says we have to, and I'm like, what? What do you mean we have to? She says, I dreamed about that place last night. She said, I was in the drive-thru, but I dreamed about the exact place last night. And that was it. I decided that, it may sound silly, but hey, it's in the books now. And it has worked out, and I do believe to God's glory it has worked out, that dream was placed in her head, and that was the deciding factor for me. There's many much harder things that happen through that process, but, the first part is to make the decision. Is this God leading me?
Right.
And dreams are known in the Bible to kind of do that. There's been some dreaming in Daniel's life, and that was a big thing. It's in the Bible. I think it might have even saved his life at one point, that the dreams he had, he might have been toast had it not been for the dreams and the deciphering of maybe king's dreams. Maybe it was something like that.
Right.
So dreams can be important. So I do believe that it's good to pay attention to those at least a little bit. But this particularly was just a little too odd to be coincidence. And there's a good many things further on that were definitely not coincidence in the making of Java Bistro.
So here's what I know about it. So I didn't know any. Just for those of you listening, I knew none of this story. That's what I. Although I think it's fascinating. I didn't know it was actually started right after like an evangelistic conference. I think that's here's why I asked Eric here, and I think it's so cool. Java Bistro, just shameless plug, phenomenal place to go if you're in the Five Forks area of Greenville, of Simpsonville. It is a great place. I think my wife spends a good amount of money, I think, there every month. So there's that. But then also too, the first time I ever went there, there's Bible verses on every cup, and there is Bibles on every table, and there are almost every table is filled, seemingly at any point in the day, with men's groups, women's groups, different Bible groups there. So not only was the founding of this restaurant definitely sort of part of your journey in faith as well, you're also actively doing it every single day. So was that sort of in your plan the whole time?
As far as the mission, well, here's a good story. This one's pretty good. Okay, so I did tell during the 6-month process of trying to acquire this business, because they weren't giving it away cheap by any means. That's learning business 101. Don't pay for a business that's not doing that well full price. But sure. I felt like God was leading me, so I reimbursed them pretty much for everything they put into it. Learning that now later, I'm like, probably wasn't the best idea because it put us in a bind. I did learn some.
That's
other
like buying
principles.
a car, like a new car, and giving somebody like buying a used car and giving somebody the new price.
Right? Yeah. It was. I learned. I really have learned a lot. Wisdom, business, and theology, all sorts of things through this journey. So during the time, that 6-month period, I did mention that I was thinking about putting Bible verses on the coffee cups. And so before I even purchased it from them, they started doing it probably a month or two before I actually acquired it. They were a different name at the time. So they just had white labels, just black and white, and they threw some verses on there, and the customers seemed to like it. But they said, we decided to go ahead and start this. We thought it was a good idea. They were believers too. Sure. When we, I think we prayed together a couple times, just a little bit, definitely talked about God a good bit. But here's the thing. I got overwhelmed probably 3 months in. Mm-hmm. And the first thing to go was the Bible verses off the cup. I guess I wasn't getting any response really to them, and I was just overwhelmed, and I didn't have time to label the cups, nor was I good at all. I was terrible at trying to delegate responsibilities. Not that there was really a lot of employees, but I was terrible about it. So that stopped. Well, a guy came in that had been coming for a while, and I don't know, this is probably 6 months to a year after I'd stopped. And he would come in periodically and was just a really nice old man. I don't even know if he's alive anymore, honestly. But he would come in and he was such a caring man, definitely a believer. You could, just tell that about him. Right. And he asked me why. Oh yeah, he asked me, why do you think God led you here, but you're struggling so hard? And I was like, I've done everything right, I really thought I had. And during that conversation, we had even went on a little further, and I went, oh, I forgot to do the Bible verses. I was supposed to do the Bible verses, and I stopped. And I'm telling you, we were broke. I was on the floor every day. I'd walk in, lock the door behind me, drop to my knees, dry heave, and pray at the same time. We were that broke. Please get us through another day. Sure. Please, dear God, get us through another day. And the bank accounts every day would dip under zero and go back up. Sure. It was terrible. Not good for me. I thought I had finances all under control before owning this place. So it was a tough time. So anyway, I just told the guy right then and there, I'm getting those Bible verses back on the cup. I know that's what's wrong. I just know. And so we started. I went home that night and I printed some of those labels. Thank you, Avery, for your labels, because that's how it got back started up. And got those on there. And trust me, when you're tired at the end of the day, you don't want to go home and try and find 30 Bible verses, get them put on those labels properly, and get it to print right. It is hard, especially when you're really tired. But I was determined. It got done. Got those cups labeled, and things have gotten better ever since then. But let me tell you about that guy real quick. He came in the next day, and because God had told him something to do, he brought in a smaller label printer and the materials to feed it, and maybe even some ink. And he gave me the receipt with it in the bag, because he said, I don't know if you can use this, but I felt led to buy this for you. And he knew it also, that was indeed, there was something going to happen through these labels. And he was right. I know the guy owned a bunch of boys' homes in the area, and his name will come to me after I leave here, I'm sure.
Sure.
But I don't think that God necessarily wants me to bring up a bunch of names. But he was a great, great man. What a wonderful soul. And I know that definitely God led him to do that. I used every bit of that money to put towards labels and get everything right. And we now get them printed by one of my friends that I met through a Bible study. But that was the turning point for us. Things just started getting better from that point on, and I do believe that your life can get a lot better if you're following God. And by can, I mean comfort level can get better. Not always, because there is some struggle. Obviously, I went to go start Java Bistro, and I went through, 4 or 5 years of just hard struggles. It's all been worth it now. I would definitely do it again, but I would need to be as naive as I was to start a restaurant from scratch.
That that it dispels that sort of myth that, if it's God's will, then it's going to be easy, right? Because that's definitely not the case.
No.
Sometimes, I don't know. Sometimes it seems like it's the opposite. But very cool. What advice would you give for others, who are sort of struggling with, how do I glorify God in my life? Obviously, spending time in prayer and Scripture is number one, right? But and looking for. But is there any? What would you say if someone asked you, "Hey, I'm a believer. I'm just not sure how exactly I should be glorifying God, in my life right now?"
Well, that's a loaded question for sure. The first thing that came to mind, and I know is definitely a piece to my puzzle, is get in a group. I do a men's group. It's one of the most impactful things in my life. I go every Wednesday, unless there's like a holiday, like, if Thanksgiving's on Thursday, sometimes we don't do one. But during the summer, we don't take summers off like a lot of groups. And there's only like 4 or 5 of us. That can be helpful too. I don't know if the size of group, the big groups are great. Don't get me wrong. They have their place. But I've got true friends. And at our age, I'm 43. My friends have dropped away. I would, right. I love my high school friends. I get in contact with them here and there. But the Christian brothers that I've developed over time, that's where it's at. And they're not afraid to talk to me about something. I'm not afraid to bring something up that I'm struggling with, and whether it be marriage, business, friendships, church, understanding. and they'll give me an honest answer, but they will measure it up to what the Bible says. But they'll also tell me how they feel about it. And to know that I'm not alone in my feelings and what I'm struggling with, and that I can't accomplish everything by myself, and that my marriage isn't always picture book, and it's real life, but I feel like I'm in the trenches with those guys.
Yeah.
That has sculpted me so much. It's that whole iron sharpens iron thing. And so that's definitely a big, big piece to advice I can give somebody. And hey, if one group doesn't work out, that doesn't mean that the other one's not going to work out. But also be willing. It's not all about you. Maybe you're going to that group to help somebody else. So you be the light in the group and you help somebody. We got to put ourselves to the side. And that's hard to do. We live in a society that's all about us and what can we get out of this life. It's hard, and we just had one this past week, was how do you die to yourself? And we really struggled with that. At first, I get this thing in my head that I think we can, I think this is achievable, and then we start scrutinizing it and really putting it over the coals, and we're like, I don't know if I know how to die to myself. Everything can have an alternate twist.
Right.
If I do it this way, am I trying to get something for me? If I'm trying to do this, am I trying to glorify myself? There's all sorts of twists and turns to that. And so you're really having to put that prayer line up to God constantly, in that conversation to Him, and wanting to glorify Him, and Him to, I guess, push out all that darkness in our hearts and be the light. And it's a daily thing. I've also learned to wake up every morning and ask God what He wants. A lot, or in the car ride to work, whatever works. Some people aren't awake enough, but the car ride to work for me a lot of the time is where I turn that radio off, and I'm driving to work, and I have a conversation with God, and I'll sit in the parking lot till it's done. God, is there anything that you want me to do different today, other than the usual, trying to glorify your name through our restaurant? And He's put people's names on my heart to pray for. He's told me at times to buy somebody a free lunch, and it just so happened that guy came in that same day and asked to borrow money till the next day, and he would pay me back the next day. And I got to tell him, I already knew I was buying you lunch today. And so those prayers are really important. If we don't ask, He may not tell. So be open to God giving you a message and just move forward with it. Of course, put it up against the Bible. God's not going to necessarily tell you to do something sinful.
Absolutely. No, that's perfect. Well, I thank you so much. Very good.
You're welcome.
Is there anything else you'd like to add? Anything else?